Hello and welcome to Rubbin Minds. My name is Hero Daniels. Many thanks for joining us today. It's a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon right here in the center of excellence, Lagos State. And we have never been more grateful for the sun because for the past 2 weeks, it has been raining cats and dogs. I personally live in the Lekki metropolis and I am seriously considering buying a speedboat or a canoe to add to my fleet of cars because you cannot even navigate with cars. You literally have to find a way to go through the waters before getting to your destination. And this is a recurring issue every single year. The National Emergency, NEMA, National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA has, constantly said, okay, these are the predictions for this year, 2024. This is expected to happen, but nothing has been done year in, year out. You see people building structures on drainage systems, and, there's so much the government can do on this particular issue. But at the same time, there's also so much the citizens can do. So let's just get straight into it and talk about our first topic today, which is sustainability floods in Nigeria. To discuss this issue with me, joining us is S.I. Ohumo, who is a data journalist. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon.
Good to have you. So let's get straight into it. Why is it that year in, year out, we're still having the recurring issue of floods in Nigeria? Why are we not taking the impact of climate change as serious as we should take it?
I should tell you that nothing I say here will come as a surprise to you or to fellow Nigerians. It's the same. You could substitute climate change for any one of our numerous problems, and the things I'm about to say will still be the same. We have a serious problem with implementation, especially with climate action and sustainability. The programs theoretically are in place. For example, when you talk about flood prevention, we have the National Adaptation Strategy and Plan on Climate Change, which is a mouthful, NASPA-CCN. We also have Nigeria's Erosion and Watershed Management Project. So these things exist. It is not that as a country we're not thinking about them. The big issue is with implementation. They'll tell you there's a lack of funding, there's always inadequate enforcement, so that hampers effectiveness, and just general coordination amongst different government levels. That's the real issue here. It's a governance and implementation problem.
Okay, it's a governance and implementation problem. So where do we move forward? According to the Daily Trust, over 24,000 households have been drenched and covered up in floods, and that is just one statistics. We can't, in different parts of Nigeria, a lot of states are affected, a lot of families are affected. How can the government really sort of implement and enforce both on the part of the citizens in terms of how the citizens, the refuse management and et cetera, and also seeing how they can enforce structural, put in structures that will make sure that the drainage systems are actually working.
Right. So, but the thing is, the problem is it's not a single-pronged problem. You can't just say drainage system. That's one of a number of interconnected issues. One of the big ones is the world globally is grappling with the effects of climate change. And especially in a coastal city like Lagos, you're going to have coastal erosion, you're going to have flooding. And when you link that to very inappropriate land use, building codes are not being respected. Everyone is building everywhere. And like you've said, with the drainage, you have a problem with infrastructure. You see, when you put all of those things together, you realize that enforcing change and implementing solutions becomes a bit more complicated. But to answer your question in terms of solutions, it's a number of things that need to happen. Land use regulation needs to be stricter, especially with construction in flood-prone areas. Building codes need to be updated and enforced, especially in Lagos. Lagos has a beautiful master plan. I remember speaking with Dr. Tiwalade. I was doing a story for the BBC. Unfortunately, on this particular issue you're talking about, it was in 2021, and I had gone to Ogun State and spoken with a family who had lost everything, and I asked the same questions you're asking now, and the experts gave me the same responses I'm giving to you now. That was 2-3 years ago, So we're talking about investments in infrastructure. Also, a big one is climate change intervention. And when you talk about that, you shift a little bit from the Nigerian government and look at the bigger picture of climate financing, right? So the effects that we're seeing here, I wouldn't say that countries in the so-called global south, like Nigeria, are especially responsible for them. So there's a global conversation about who should actually be funding some of these more expensive climate interventions. And usually the answer is the G20, G7 countries, right? So you also have to talk about the international community funding more climate adaptation and mitigation solutions, which is why I said it's complicated.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yes, I perfectly understand. And I think it's also very important for us to discuss, some of the effects that climate change. Obviously, one of the byproducts of the effect of climate change is flooding. And now let's talk about the effects of flooding on the economy. One of such is food scarcity. We all know that Nigerians are really struggling with food shortages right now, and one of the major factors causing this is the flood. How do you think we can address this issue?
Okay, so with agriculture, I assume that we're zooming out of Lagos for a bit and looking at the states that are more what is the word now? Are more involved in farming and with feeding the nation, right? It's odd that the effects are so different in different places. If you talk about states in the north, for example, you'll be thinking more of desertification. And then if you talk about some other states, you're thinking about flooding. It's really odd. But to come to the states that have issues with this and are also part of the food chain, you think of things like resilient agriculture. So we are talking about flood resistant crops. You're talking about improving irrigation system. You're thinking also about food storage and distribution. What happens when a key road that is used to distribute food from farmlands to markets, for example, gets flooded? You're thinking about how to collaborate with local communities to implement food reserves. You're thinking about diversification. But again, because we're on national television in Nigeria, I don't want to talk so much about these theoretical solutions. Like I said, the government and the multiple agencies, they've got this on paper. It's really boils down to the same conversations we have about things like power, the same conversations we have about policing. It's implementation. How do we move from a point where we know what to do to a point where we're actually doing it consistently? And to be very honest with you, I don't have the answer.
I totally understand your sentiment. And I also understand how it feels that you have the solution right there in front of you and you have failed to implement. And now, do you think the citizens can play an active role in terms of putting pressure on the elected government officials from the local government level to the state level? Do you think there needs to be an urgent pressure from the citizens to the people that we have elected to serve us? Would that work?
Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? At the very base level, you have shelter, you have food, you have safety, right? And those are the things that when the people do not have them, they get into the streets and they march and they demand answers and solutions from their elected governments. Well, for Nigerians, all of those very basic things are under attack. All of them. So it's a matter of how much willpower can you expend and how do you allocate it? Or for the entirety of Nigeria, you can decide that you're going to apply pressure and try and get a government to make changes with flooding. But remember that outside of floods, even when the food is there and the farmlands aren't flooded, you can't afford you can't afford to eat. And then you shift to security as well. You're not safe. If you're not safe, you're not actually thinking about guarding your home from flooding. So when there's attack on all sides, I don't know that we can be focused enough to apply continued pressure for a particular thing to change. So honestly, I know that this conversation has been a bit of a downer, but we're right back to the point of implementation and governance. Really, everything starts and ends there. Because even when we grapple with the problem of climate financing and say we get additional funding from donor countries or from the countries who have more responsibility towards climate action, how are these funds disbursed? Not outside of corruption even, how efficiently are the programs put in place to mitigate and adapt to climate action? How effectively are they being managed? Are we just having round tables, or are we actually implementing solutions that are sustainable? And from what I know, anyone is free to correct me. I don't think that we are. So it's not a people thing. There's only so much change you can demand for if the systems do not exist to listen to that and actually make amends. And even if you do not have the luxury of sustained focus to continue to apply pressure, nothing's going to change.
So how worried do you think we should be? Yes, flooding happened in certain areas. It doesn't affect other areas. Now, the non-affected areas, how worried should they be? Because I've also noticed this with human behavior. Most often than not, when something doesn't impact on you, or you think it doesn't impact on you directly, you might not necessarily want to take a bold step to make sure you stop it. How worried? What is your prediction about the current situation of flooding in the nearest future? Perhaps if we put that out there, perhaps it could convince more people to take this more seriously.
Oh, it's a very, very serious issue. And I think that there is no such thing as, I'm going to speak pidgin here, it not concern me, because it does concern everyone. There is a multiplier effect. There's so many ways that it will reach you. For example, when a number of people have to leave their homes because it's been flooded, you have displacement. Where do these people go? The food thing you talked about, for example, everybody has to eat. When food supply is disrupted due to flooding, that concerns you. And one very topical issue as well, right now in Lagos, you have the cholera situation, right? Cholera is a waterborne disease. And bad things happen when you have water on the streets for an extended period of time. You have an uptick in waterborne diseases. So I think that whether or not your home is flooded right now, or it has been flooded last week, or you don't know if it will be flooded next week, this is a serious issue that affects the whole of Nigeria. And because we're placing this conversation, we're situating it in climate change. Climate change is not a problem that is going anywhere anytime soon. It is one of the most pressing issues of our time globally. So it does concern you as a matter of urgency. What can you do about it? I think that, to come back to what you have said, we can demand more of our government. I don't know how we do that efficiently, at scale, and sustainably. And so I'm going to put the question back to you. What do you think we can do to move the needle for the Nigerian government to take all of these fantastic committees and all of these fantastic departmental heads that they have in ministries like the Ministry of Environment and actually make some tangible change? The Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning as well. All of these parastatals are connected. How do you think that we can get the Nigerian government to sustainably, consistently implement solutions?
Well, I personally think that it is everybody's responsibility to just speak as much as they can and use the platforms that they have. And that is exactly why we're having this conversation. We could have chosen any other topic to speak about on Rubbin Minds and channel televisions, but we know the government is watching, and that is why everybody has to make sure that they use their platforms to speak, especially young people. The social media is out there to avail to make sure that you're heard at any time. And as opposed to indulging ourselves in conversations that does not necessarily move the country forward, we can put the same energy in talking about these things. Now, I can also relate to the fact that you said that, for people that are affected directly, there's a level of pressure that comes with that. In my opening monologue, I did say that, yes, I live in Lekki, and it's not funny. So it's my car. It's even drenched in water because I had to pass through a flooded street just to get to this place. So it was very, very important to me. It was pressing to me. And even for those that it isn't pressing to, there's always a ripple effect. So the best we can do is just to keep speaking, use platforms like social media, and if possible, organize town hall meetings and invite these elected officials to come. It's their responsibility to do that. But if they fail to do that, we can come together as the youths of this country, organize the town hall meetings, and call the elected officials, invite them, and tell them. So that's just a tiny little bit of a percentage of what we can do. But by the time we put all of these little drops of rain together, I believe it will make a mighty ocean.
That's a very interesting analogy given the conversation that we're having. Yeah. But yes, I do agree with you.
Do you have any final?
Yes, I was going to say public awareness, local participation, community-based adaptation. All of these are fantastic sounding words. By the end of the day, it's about looking for short, straight lines to move from wonderful sounding theoretical frameworks to actual implementation that changes lives.
That's true. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a wonderful conversation. And yes, thank you for lending your voice to this very pressing issue. And we believe that the people in power will do what is needed. Don't just stand there teasing me. Now it's time to show and prove.